Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live. Jacobson, your host, here, and I welcome some of the new faces, some of the faces that I've seen before, but as I always emphasize, based on Jewish mysticism, we are all renewed every moment anew. So even if you think you have an old face, it's actually renewed every instant. It's like a new flow of energy enters into existence, and the contract of life is renewed. The challenge, of course, is to be able to access that renewed energy also on a surface level. Just like we breathe every moment anew, you cannot rely on yesterday's breath or even 5 minutes ago. Every moment we have to exhale and inhale. And the same thing with the heartbeat. It's in constant motion, contracting and expanding. So the very fabric and stuff of life is about movement. Constant movement, constant mobility, constant dual process of exhale, inhale, which is really the secret of all energy, is about that the tension and the resolution as a result of two forces that are, in a way, I don't want to say clashing with each other, but in a way challenging each other. And as they challenge each other, that's what creates energy. So, for instance, when we take a pump, we invent a pump, which is really just simulating the heart. A pump requires a contraction and expansion for it to pump energy. And the same thing is with electricity. And any form of energy consists of this so-called dual process. In Hebrew, those of you who know Hebrew, the word for electricity is chashmal. You know that? Those that you know, chashmal is the word for Hebrew. You've heard electricity in Hebrew. Where does it come from? Where does the word chashmal come from? Does anyone here that did not go to Hebrew school know where the word chashmal comes from? Okay. So the word chashmal comes from a verse in the book of Ezekiel, where he is describing a vision, the vision of Ezekiel it's called. And this vision, Ezekiel, in very cryptic terms, describes different things that he sees. It's essentially a mystical vision. And among the things that he describes is the following verse. He says, V'achayes rotze v'shuv. And in that same verse, he uses the word chashmal. What does achayes rotze v'shuv mean in simple English? Chayes is life. Chayes is energy. And rotze v'shuv means that he sees that this energy is running to and fro. Rotze means to run, and shuv means to return. Which, to put a more contemporary language, you'd say it's a form of tension and resolution, which really is the essence of what life is all about. As I said before, the heartbeat, the breath is all about this type of two dual process, exhale, inhale. But it's not just a physical thing. If you think about it also psychologically and emotionally, what really makes a human being tick? Of course, each of us are unique. But one universal element, the common denominator that we all have is that life is about some form of tension and resolution. When you aspire to something, you reach for something, that's a form of an angst that creates some tension. Necessary for life. If you do not have any tension, you basically be inanimate and satisfied with animal bliss. As I always mention, I remember the first time I saw it, but you travel a little out of the city, and you see, called behemoths, you see animals grazing in the pastures and the meadows, and if you're in a particularly depressed mood, or saddened by something, you can be very envious of these animals grazing. They don't seem to have any problems. They don't need therapy. They can spend hours just munching on grass in the fields. They breathe, they sleep, and they wake up again and they start the day again. Protecting their young. Life is very simple. So when life gets very complicated, many of us aspire, sometimes want to have, that's also, I guess, a form of tension, just to want to have that animal bliss. But the fact of the matter is, how many of you really would be happy munching in a meadow all day and all long? For animals, it works. They're not human beings, whatever it is, and I'll describe in a moment the way the mystics see it. We do have a measure of tension. Obviously, when tension gets out of control and it's out of balance, then what happens is tension turns into anxiety, and anxiety turns into depression, and it turns into forces that can even paralyze any movement. But then there's a second side that is necessary in life, and that's called resolution. So if you aspire to something, and then you do things to be able to achieve that aspiration, you want to fulfill your dream, whatever that dream may be. It could be in business, it can be in personal life, it can be in intelligence and knowledge, it can be through travel, it can be through romance. I mean, you name it. It's the growth of a human being. It's like climbing a ladder. So you can't climb 10 rungs at a time. You climb 1, 2, you look upward and you see something and you reach for it. That reach is a form of tension. Because until you really get it, you don't really fully feel at peace. Once you achieve what you have aspired, so that, in a sense, creates an integration, a resolution. And then, as it is with human nature, we aspire for more. And they tell the famous, they tell a story, maybe it's not so famous. One of the Hasidic Rebbes, they called it Semetic, and when he was a young child, he was playing with other children in the field. And there was a ladder there. They were playing on a ladder. And the children were climbing a little up on the ladder, down the ladder, children. But all the children were afraid to climb to the top of the ladder. The only one that climbed to the top was this young boy, this young child who later would become a great giant, spiritual giant in his own right. His grandfather, known as the Baal Tanya, a very massive scholar and mystic and so on, a revolutionary, this is around the 18th century, was watching, and afterwards he asked his little grandson, why is it that all the other children were afraid to climb to the top of the ladder, and you were not? You had the courage to go all the way to the top. So he said, simple Zayd, Grandpa. He said, when all the other children climbed, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were afraid to climb higher. When I was climbing, I kept looking up. So I saw how low I was, and it motivated me to climb higher. Now you can imagine that's why he became who he became. Now we all have these two options all the time. You'll see when you are socializing or hanging out with people that are less accomplished than you, you'll always stagnate as a result. Because you say, look how much I've done compared to these losers, so to speak. Let's not use that word. To these less accomplished individuals. And it makes you feel good. And usually that type of self-satisfaction is usually not a great motivator. But when you're around people, you hang around people that are much more accomplished than you, if you have the courage to do that, then what it does is it motivates you. You start saying, hey, look at what I have done, relatively speaking. So we can have that. We have that choice. Do you look down or do you look up? A healthy person should be looking up most of the time. You look up and you see what you have not yet reached. Not just to make yourself feel anxious or angst, but in order to motivate you, to prompt you to move there, to move upward. The key is not to move too fast or not to have too much angst. And that's why this verse, going back, is so vital. What it means is that energy, all forms of energy require rotze, a form of tension, reaching, aspiring, reaching to something beyond that you have right now. And second is resolution, shuv, return, which means integrating it, breathing it back in. Like fresh air. So you exhale, and then you inhale a new breath. And the same thing with the heart, and the same thing with all forms of energy. And this is why chashmal, electricity, you see the symbol of electricity you'll always see is like a lightning bolt, which is usually for some reason drawn like a Z, like a zigzag. Because lightning, when you see it, seems exactly, when you look at lightning in the heavens, when lightning strikes, what you see is it's like runs and it returns. It's like a bolt. That's what it is. You call it almost like a running current. So when we imagine, even though electricity is invisible, but when we imagine electricity like we see lightning, it's something that's never stands in one place. It's constantly in the type of movement. And basically, it's what's called the dual movement of positive and negative, which you can demonstrate with any magnet, and that electromagnetism of two forces that create tension. And that tension results in energy, in the flow of energy. Without the tension, there's no energy. You get two positives or two negatives, they are neutral, and nothing will grow from it. So all growth is a process of a tension and a resolution. I even once created a chart, which was, I think, too complicated actually to use, but I have to revisit it. I created a chart of the Sratze and Reshuvin, our own lives. You can diagnose yourself, guaranteed. Either you have too much angst or you have too much resolution. You're too much bliss and too comfortable with yourself, or there's too much anxiety. That's the imbalance of life, and that's what disturbs health, and it disturbs the flow. So we need both, but the challenge is not just to have both. The challenge is to make sure they're in the right measure, where they create a healthy type of movement and healthy energy. So this is not just as an introduction. This is also the theme of this evening, which I chose because this week, some of you may be familiar, if you're familiar with the concept of the Torah chapters. So in Jewish tradition, in Jewish life, much of the time is regulated and in a way measured by the different chapters you read in the Torah. You go to any synagogue on a particular week, they take out a Torah scroll on a Shabbos, and also Mondays and Thursdays, and they read from a particular chapter. So there are 52 chapters in what we call the Bible, the Torah. And these 52 chapters, each of them breaks into 7 sections. In effect, you have a chapter that corresponds to every week in the year, and one that corresponds to every day in the week. 7 sections of 52 chapters. So, in fact, we really have, for every day, you really have a corresponding part of the Torah. And one of the great challenges that I've always discussed, and this may be the underlying, mission of this coming together here, is how can we find relevance in a particular chapter when many of them seem to be discussing about archaic ideas that are a different part of the geography, different time in history. So yes, there are universal messages in the Bible that remain compelling and capture the imagination of thinkers and poets till this day. Principles of the Torah. But there are many, many chapters that when you read it, you don't necessarily see relevance. And one of them that I'm going to address this evening is a special chapter that's not read usually. In this week's, as we go from Purim to Passover in the Jewish calendar, so there are 4 special chapters that are read in addition to the regular cycle. Which means, on the regular cycle this week is the end of the book of Exodus. It's the second book of the 5 books. Which, by the way, is the reason the word Chumash. If you ever hear the word Chumash, Chumash means 5th. So it means 5. That's why it's called Chumash, because it's 5 books. And we're concluding the second book is called the book of Exodus, or the book of Shemais. And specifically it discusses the construction of the sanctuary, the holy sanctuary, which would later become the temple in Jerusalem. At this point, it's still a portable sanctuary that the Jews traveled with through the wilderness. But in addition, at the end of, when they take out the Torah scrolls of Shabbos, they'll take out a second scroll. Because this Shabbos, we also bless the new month. Which month is this? The month of Nisan, which is a unique month, as I'll explain. It's the month of Passover. So this Shabbos, the Shabbos that precedes the new moon of a month is called Shabbos Mevarchim. It's a special blessing is said during the Musaf prayer, during this extra prayer on Shabbat, which blesses the new month, that it should be a month of joy and a month of success and a month of health, and materially and spiritually on all levels. And so this month is being blessed. A particular Torah, a second Torah scroll is taken out of the ark, and they read in it the chapter that is called in one word Parshas HaChodesh. HaChodesh, which literally means renewal, or the month, and it refers to the chapter it refers to a chapter in another portion of the Torah that discusses, or when God finally tells Moses that HaChedesh Hazeh Lachem, this is the new month when your people will be, when you will redeem the people, and I believe, Egypt. So this chapter has a very particular significance. It really sets in motion the whole entire Exodus that we are familiar with. And that chapter is read this week. So all this that I've just said is quite technical, and I hope I didn't bore anybody with the technicalities or remind some people here of their good days in yeshiva and Hebrew school and how insignificant or irrelevant was all these texts. Because the bottom line is that, as many of you may know, or if you don't, you'll hear now, that there's the two parts of the Torah. There's the technical, mechanical, robotic part, and then there's the soul. And frankly, without the soul part, without the soul dimension, the rest of it is usually rendered quite empty. So yes, there may be Jewish communities that abide by these laws robotically without thinking. And not only there may be, there actually are. I've seen a few in my time. But the bottom line is that's really missing the boat in a way, because the real dimension is the soul of it, which is the relevance. So of course the big question is, how is this relevant to us, what God told Moses over 3,300 years ago when the Jewish people left Egypt? And specifically this word HaChedesh, this is the new month. Because the way we have to look at it is this. It doesn't, not only that it should be relevant, but it should be indispensable. Frankly, we're all busy people. What we're busy with is another story, but everybody's busy with one thing or another. And when you want to talk about something, and we're all spending a few moments together here this evening, I hope it's more than a few moments, let's call it an hour or so, or 2 or 3 or whatever. We hope that that our time together should not be wasted, and that what we discuss here is actually helpful to us in our lives. I would not have the chutzpah to sit here and pontificate if I didn't think that what I have to say has relevance. Now, what I'm going to share is not necessarily my own wisdom, it's what I've learned. And I consider it to be maybe the best kept secret in a way, because it carries mystical and spiritual and, more above all, psychological and emotional truths that can help us all uncover a dimension inside of ourselves that we may not be familiar with, or we may be, but it's hard to access. So it's called being resonance. So for me, the challenge has always been, when we talk about any topic for that matter, but especially a Torah topic, it has to have profound relevance to our personal lives. The things we're struggling with, the things that we carry inside of our intimate psyches that maybe we share or we don't share with anyone else. For that matter, we may not even share it with ourselves. And that's ultimately the litmus test of a truth that resonates, and not just resonates as a nice idea, but one that is empowering and can provide us with some life skills that can help us deal with these challenges that we all struggle with. So I don't profess to know everyone's personal challenges. Everyone has their life. But the human condition is such that many things we can understand each other because we share certain things. There's no one here that has not cried in their lifetime. And there's probably no one here that hasn't laughed in their lifetime. So when you talk about the basic fundamentals of human life, most of us, when we feel pain, we can empathize with someone else because pain has similar reactions. It doesn't mean you can empathize with every type of pain. There are obviously pains in life that are almost impossible to even, undescribable how horrible they are. And if you have not been there, it's very difficult to talk. But nevertheless, we're blessed in some way. Maybe it is because, as the mystics say, there's an integral unity that connects us all, whether we feel it or not, or whether we like it or not. So maybe if a person is able to suspend their ego a bit, they can actually feel another person. And the reason we don't is because we're self-contained and we're self-consumed with self-interest. There's a story they tell about another great Rebbe. To me, it's one of my favorites because it's like, talk about understanding the classic, what is a true rabbi. Not an administrator, not a fundraiser, not any rabbi you've ever met. It's a true soul doctor. A person who is an expert on souls. So just like a doctor can give you an x-ray of your body, a true rabbi or rebbe is someone that can give you an x-ray of your soul. So they tell the story of this great rebbe who in Russia as well, who would, as the custom was, people would come to consult with him about personal matters or get a blessing. And this was a particular time where they met, where people were lined up after the holiday season, the high holiday season. So before they were going back home after the holidays, they came to the Rebbe to get a blessing, or to discuss or consult with some matter that was concerned them. And the line was long. Many people wanted to meet this great Rebbe. His wisdom, his sensitivity, his spirituality was renowned. Anyway, things were progressing nicely, moving along, and the assistants that were helping facilitate were all very glad that that people were getting their time, and everything was going well. Suddenly, after one person finished his audience and left the room, the Rebbe tells the secretary, tells his assistant, he wants to take a break, which was really unlike him. He usually never took a break, but the Rebbe wants to take a break. Maybe he's tired, maybe he has something else he has to do, whatever. So he thought it'll be a break for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. So he told the people there's going to be a short break and come back or wait, your turn. Anyway, it wasn't a half hour, it wasn't an hour, it was hours and hours and hours. It got late into the night, and finally, the assistant told everybody, it seems that this is not going to be short. Maybe you should go home to go to sleep and come back in the morning. Many people were waiting to travel, but they wanted to wait. They had no choice. And as I said, it was unlike the Rebbe to do something like that. He knew people were waiting. What the secretary assistant did hear through the door was that he heard the Rebbe sobbing, weeping. So clearly he was going through something very difficult. It wasn't just resting. Anyway, after a day and a half, the Rebbe can resume the audience as if nothing happened, and till the whole thing finished, and remained an oddity. A while later, the sister had an opportunity to ask the Rebbe and said to him, Rebbe, I know that I don't want to intrude on the Rebbe's personal work, but the Rebbe always encourages us to ask questions. I was wondering if the Rebbe was willing to share what happened. That usually the Rebbe would suddenly stop and have people wait a day and a half. And the Rebbe said, I'll tell you. What happened was the following. When people come see me and they share their life with me in one way or another, or they share something that they're going through, and they ask for advice, the first thing I need to do is find a parallel inside my own soul of a similar issue or challenge that person has. It may not be quite the same extent. It may be bedakas, as they say in Hebrew, subtle. But nevertheless, I have to find something that I can identify with. Because I'm not just here to talk, give ideas and advice. And when I hear from somebody, why did God send that person to me? Because I have to hear what that person has to say, just as that person has to hear what I have to say. So I have to find in my own soul, in my own heart, in my own inner consciousness, something that's similar. And then I can repair it, and then I could advise that person to do the same on their level. There was this person who came to see me, and they shared something with me that was so horrendous, so impossible for me to fathom. I couldn't find anywhere inside my own soul anything similar. Not even in the most subtle form. So I had to stop, because I could not give advice. And I had to find it somewhere inside of me. And I was basically praying and soul-searching with a deep introspection to try to find that flaw or that inconsistency within myself. And once I did, I was able to give the advice to that person and then resumed. Now, it's very rare that you hear the inner workings of a true Rebbe. They usually don't share. As they say in this world, I always say this when people ask me about Kabbalah, that those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. That's how it usually is with the deepest secrets. Yeah, people who are saying, especially if they take the money for it, I don't know how much you could trust. But those that truly know, and I've met a mystic or two in my life, they don't make a big fuss about it, and it's not something you can just elicit from them. You'll hear what you have to hear. And if you don't have to hear the mysteries of your soul and what reincarnation you came from and what your destiny holds, you will not hear it. Unless it's necessary for you to know, and unless you also will responsibly do something with it and not just like the everyone loves the unknown, to satisfy the curiosity of the exotic. So when we talk about these truths, to me, to be able to discuss all these matters, it's critical that we all go deeper into our own souls and hearts. And for that, we really have to somewhat suspend sometimes our preconceptions and definitely our egos. So I'm not making any conditions here. You can do what you wish. But I will just say that truth in general, wherever you go and wherever you'll be, is in direct proportion that it will enter into your system, direct proportion to how much you allow it to enter. As the Kotzker Rebbe was once asked when he was a little child, when they asked him, where is God? So he said, wherever you let him in. In other words, if you were to define reality as reality, where is reality? The answer is where you let it in. There are many people who live very unreal lives, deceptive lives, duplicitous lives. Is there no reality in them? There's reality. They just don't let it in. Or let's put it this way, it remains locked inside of them and they don't let it out. That may be a better way to put it. So within us all, there is a sense, an instinct of truth. And when we live in an untruthful world, which the world that we live in, a cruel world, we increasingly become more callous and cynical in a way, because we see everybody else around us, people we cannot trust. So we too, so-called, withdraw and hide behind our own shells and our own defense mechanisms. Just like a turtle will withdraw when thinking he's going to be attacked, or she, into a hard shell. Every one of us has a shell, some of us harder than others. There's complex defense mechanisms we develop as we go through life, and especially if we've been hurt in our childhoods, we definitely develop these armors. And usually, that's what most people see when they meet you, because you don't let down your guard so fast, and for good reason. Who can you trust? So trust has to be earned. But at the same time, we can also get trapped in our own protection, where you're so much, you're so blocked by your own armor that when real truth comes your way, you don't even let it in, and you don't even know. And it's a difficult one, because how can you decide and choose? So there's a method and there's a process. I discussed it a little last week. It's not so much the theme of this evening, but since I'm touching upon it, I want to just say one thing about it. We were blessed with minds. The mind. And a mind is an interesting commodity. It's an interesting power. A mind doesn't make decisions. The mind at its best is like a good processor, a good computer that processes information, can watch things, can observe, can study, can apply different wisdom and different experiences, and then can tell you, this is what I have observed. But then comes the moment of decision, is always going to be an emotional one. The mind can lead you to the door, but should you marry this person? Should you choose this route? Should you travel here or travel there? Is always going to be an emotional decision. Hopefully it's informed by an intelligent process of research. That way you don't make the mistakes that one can make if you just follow your emotions. So being someone that can use their minds, it's in a way, what a mind really is, it's almost like an explorer that looks around and sees like a scout, can I trust this environment? So when you meet someone for the first time, what should be happening, I'm talking in a healthy situation, is your mind is exploring through questions, through probing, through observing. You test. People test each other. Maybe that's not a good word. No one likes to use it. But I'll call tested, calling observation. Observant Jew. You're observing and watching and so on. And as your mind tells you different things, different results, in a healthy situation, slowly your heart will emerge. You'll allow your emotions to interact. But until that point of that trust is achieved, most of us will not allow our hearts to interact. There's also the other extreme where you let your heart out too quickly, for whatever reason it is, and you trust too quickly and usually get disappointed and hurt. So there's a process. But the point that I was making here was that when you're addressing any topic around the Torah and so on, at least where I come from, if it doesn't have that profound relevance that touches and resonates in that inner place of reality or truth that each of us carries, to me it's been a waste of the evening. So that's my objective here, to take this theme of this week's portion, which I said is renewal, and apply it to our lives. So let's talk about this thing called renewal. When you see newborn children playing around, And I'm just blessed to have a new grandchild, already 4 months old, and living in California. So I'm observing it firsthand. But every one of us, and I'm sure everybody here, has seen children. And there's something very attractive and something very contagious even. A child never rests because they've entered a new world, and they're exploring all the time. And they're taken by the enchantment of life. And sometimes when you observe it, if you think about it, you'd love to be in a place like that. And sometimes you wonder, as I at least wonder, does the child know what kind of difficult world he or she has entered? And what will happen when the child will begin to, so-called, become aware that life is not as exciting and as enchanting and magical as a newborn child or the first months or first years a child experiences. So where's that point that we become jaded, basically? What's the point where we've turned, when we call it, we lost our innocence? Anybody here remembers the moment you lost your innocence? You don't have to expose exactly how that happened. But does anybody really remember? I've thought about it many times. I can't really identify my own moment of losing paradise, so to speak, or losing a loss of innocence. But I will say, the reason that we can't remember the moment is because once you cross over, it's like a new world. And it doesn't, and it's like two different type of personalities. So, what do we really remember when we were really young children? We don't remember much. Maybe we have these fleeting memories here and there. As adults, we suddenly come to the term what we call maturity. So what's maturity? Maturity is, don't be so innocent, don't be so naive. This world is not such a simple world. You know, like people, I can't tell you how many times I hear this every day. You know, Rabbi, you're very optimistic, we like you and all that, but you haven't seen the harshest part of this life, this world. And there's darkness you have not seen. And I know what they're trying to say. And I tell them, well, you know something, maybe you haven't seen light that I have seen. So we're both in the same boat. I'll introduce you to my perspective, you introduce me to yours, and we'll see who will prevail. You know? Because, as it says in the Bible, right in the beginning of Genesis, it says that that light and darkness were all intermingled like one big snowball effect. There's no such thing as something that's completely light, and there's no such thing as something that's completely dark. It doesn't work that way. Everything there are glimmers of light, even in the darkest places, and the opposite is also true. And what's difficult in life is that it gets all confused, and you can't make heads or tails. You can't distinguish between the two. So, the question of feeling rejuvenation, renewal, in a world where we sometimes feel very old and worn down and broken even, is not a simple challenge. Yes, I'm sure everybody can find moments, especially if you drink enough, and a few other so-called using other external substances, foreign substances, that you can get yourself into some type of high. Whether it's healthy or not is another story. And that can last for a little while. And people do that to relieve the pain, to relieve the tension, as I mentioned, tension, to relieve the monotony. People will do anything when there's that type of state. People are desperate. When you're desperate, you'll do all kinds of things, whether it's healthy or not. That's part of the sign, that to me, that's a sign of health, that a person is alive. You know, whenever, I just gave a talk a little while ago, a few weeks ago, to a group of practitioners who deal with drug rehab and drug and alcohol rehabilitation and stuff like that. And they wanted to hear a perspective from so-called mystical perspective. I guess mystical / psychological. And I shared with them, I said, from a mystical perspective, every human being has a lot of energy inside of them. And how do you know when a person has a lot of energy? You see them acting out one way or another. So they can act out in a very healthy way and build things, but they can also act out in a very destructive way and destroy things. So when you see a young teen, or any person who is extremely addictive type of personality, you know, they easily are drawn to anything that is addictive. And what does it tell you about that person? So I asked the question to the professionals. So they said it tells you they probably have an unhealthy life, and they're desperate, and they need something to relieve themselves with. So they go to drugs or to alcohol or to sex or to gambling, whatever it is that is the particular addiction. And I said to them, well, the mystic would say that that's true, but there's one step deeper. Why do some resort to these addictions and others don't? In the same circumstance, both of them have suffered. Take two children from dysfunctional homes, or two children who've suffered some trauma, and some will go toward and become more addictive than others. Why is that? They say, well, that we don't really know. I'll say, well, I'll tell you what I can share with you is, the reason is because addiction is a sign of very profound energy that wants to be released and doesn't know how to be released. So it's not just relieving a pain and trying to medicate yourself or numb yourself to the pains of life, which is definitely a legitimate element. There's another thing, is a lot of energy the person has, and if it's not channeled in a healthy way, they need to have a high. Some people who are more mediocre perhaps don't need to have that type of high. And there's actually a Talmudic statement that says, Kol hagadol mechaveri yitzrei gadol mimenu. The greater the person, the greater the yetzer hara. The greater the person, the greater the evil inclination. The greater passion they will have to unhealthy things. So how do you explain that? The answer is because it's all about energy. So even if energy is being misdirected, it's still energy. The challenge is how do you dissect the two? How do you split the energy from its unhealthy object? So to just use an example, I remember once in this class someone asked me the question. They said, what you teach is very interesting and nice stuff, but look, frankly, it doesn't seem very sexy to become a tzaddik. Someone who doesn't have any temptations and has no fun and doesn't sin once in a while. And you need to have the taste of the forbidden fruit. They say, Mayim gnuvim yimtaku. The stolen waters are always sweeter. And it doesn't sound like, this type of aspiring to become a tzaddik doesn't sound like really a very exciting thing. It sounds like you come to a point where you're so holy and pure that nothing disturbs you. Who wants to live a life like that? So what would you say? That's an interesting question, right? I never thought of it that way. I first said to everybody here, well, first of all, you're not talking to a tzaddik, so you got the wrong guy. You have to talk to a real tzaddik, and maybe they have something to say. But I shared with them what I thought was this. I said, you're misunderstanding what a tzaddik is. I mean, it's not a tzaddik like Grandma Rose said, oh, you're such a tzaddik, you brought me a pillow, That's not what we're talking about. A tzaddik goes like this. When you see a little child, for instance, play with toys, and they're passionately involved in their game, and they're all excited about it, completely consumed. Then take someone a little 10 years older, and they're sitting at a computer, and they're busy in the same type of passion with some Twitter or whatever it is, some new gadget. And people do this. I mean, you know how many hours a day. And then take someone 10 years later. Well, they may be doing the same thing, but let's just, for argument, just to make this experiment a little broad, they're reading a book, whatever the book is. And they're reading it also completely immersed and engrossed. And then there's another person who's going out as a volunteer and helping other people, and they're passionate about it and completely excited about it. And then you have a tzaddik who dwells in the spiritual realms, a spiritual person, who gets completely passionate and excited about the spiritual, about the sublime, and not the material. So tell me, what's the difference between the child, the teenager, the one reading the book, the one making money and is very passionate about it, the one eating a candy and loves it, and the tzaddik? What's the difference? The difference is only one thing. They all have energy, they all have passion. The difference is the object of the desire. A tzaddik too has great temptations and desires. And that can equal probably the temptations and desires even of the sinful person. The difference is, one has matured to a point that the object of desire is not a little toy. Most of you would not want to right now interested in getting down on your knees and the floor playing with a little toy or games. Or maybe you would. Maybe the MLC at 6 can provide that too. We can create a little playground if people need that. But you know what I mean. In other words, as a person develops their interests, the passion doesn't change. What you're simply changing is the intelligence and what you consider to be a desirable thing. So when you're teaching someone, and which is a big mistake, people think that the purpose of called discipline, of you disciplining your Yetzer Hara, so to speak, disciplining your evil inclination or your temptations, is to weaken them, is to keep them at bay, to control them. Mind over matter. The heart, the mind controls the heart. Or as Lawrence Taylor said, when they asked him, how does he play? You all know Lawrence Taylor? Not a mystic, but the famous Giants linebacker. Okay, so he used to play even when he was quite injured. And they asked him, how do you